Citations, everyone. Y'all ready for some controversy? Are you all ready for a certified I disagree with Kono moment after we've had a pretty decent run lately? Because, oh boy, we're having that today. Well, might as well get on with it. And say it then. The artifact weapons were a mistake.
What?
Okay, I know it sounds bad. As I was saying, artifact weapons were a mistake, at least in terms of the lore. Gameplay-wise, they were an incredible addition, and a lightning in a bottle for Legion that I don't think can be repeated the same way. I'm prepared to eat my own words for Legion Remix, but we'll see on that. Really awesome and best of the best weapons in the story to wield against our most feared enemies, customize them, and on top of that, of joining shoulder to shoulder to the best of our class that has to offer in our order halls. It was an exciting time, for sure. But when the dust settled, it was time to return to artifact weapons, or rather, never use them again, because we had them depowerable. Now they're just kind of sitting in our banks collecting dust. And while many of them lost their power that they had when we fought the Legion, that doesn't mean they don't still carry a portion of their original power either. Or in some special cases with Xal'atath, the Blade of the Black Empire, they disappeared and took life of their very own, and went on to inflict damage to an old god, never to be seen again. The blade, I mean, not the spooky lady trapped inside of it, of course. Or with Hati escaping Titanstrike's fate and staying with us on our hunts far after the events with Gorable. And now we're in this weird roadblock where where fans are kind of split on what to do next. Or maybe I'm in the minority here. Many want to keep their artifact weapons rotting in their banks, or to become relevant again somehow. Me though, I want them back in the hands of their old owners, or new owners really. Some more than others. Truly, it just felt like we were robbing them and did them unjustly. Elsewise, they're never going to appear in the story again and just be rusted relics. Forgotten relics, really. And with Legion nearing a decade old, God, we're old, I think it's high time those weapons saw some action once again, with some new and old wielders again. And that's today's video. I'm gonna do my best to say where some of these weapons should go to for canonical characters that are not us. And I know many are going to get upset regardless for such an outrageous idea. Many see these weapons as theirs in their eyes, but you still wielded them once, and you could still use them for transmog. So just be glad it happened. Or don't. I don't know, I'm not your dad. Let's just get this party started. And as before, these are just my opinions as to where the weapons should go, based on the lore that we know on these weapons, and who'd likely wield them after us. The two twin rune blades, known as the Blades of the Fallen Prince, was formerly known as the legendary sword of the Lich King, Rossmorn. When it was shattered by Tyrian Fordring, it was scattered throughout the halls of Icecrown, and then was reforged as something new by Bolvar Fordragon, the last Lich King. No longer but one blade, but now two. I think that Darian Mograine, already a renowned leader and a wielder of two rune blades, would be perfect for this, as he is both the leader of the Four Horsemen and the entire Ebon Blade, and would be a perfect candidate to take up these two swords and wield them for the betterment of Azeroth. A powerful, ever-hungry axe forged by an ever-power-hungry Eredar demon, Netrazar. He was placed in this very powerful relic that he once wielded and was imprisoned in by his very own craft by Kil'jaeden himself. It craved blood, it craved souls, claiming anything that it cleaved, whether it was a demon or not. And most of all, craving Kil'jaeden most of all for doing this to him. Nazgrim, already a wielder of axes and one of the current Four Horsemen, in my opinion would make for a great new wielder of this power-hungry axe. Mostly because I think he would understand to restrain such a weapon based on his experiences in life under Garrosh and the Horde, but feed it when the time was right for blood and glory. Frostmourne was not the only rune blade that the Dreadlords created in service to their Dark Lords and the Burning Legion. Apocalypse was forged to also manifest plagues, create infighting, and spread death and disease in the wake of any world the blade was wielded on. Exchanging many hands through many worlds, the blade eventually ended up with the Dark Riders on Azeroth, cursed men by Medivh to fetch mighty weapons and artifacts throughout the lands. Once more, I think a member of the Four Horsemen would make for a fine wielder of such a blade, mainly in the hands of the former king Thoris Trollbane, who already typically wields a two-handed sword. Though he typically is more acquainted with frost than unholy magic, I still think this would be a perfect fit for a member of the Four Horsemen. Two gifted warglaives that were empowered by Kil'jaeden himself and handed over to one of Illidan's prized Demon Hunter students. After his second and final death, Veritas' blades would be wielded by another in service to Illidan's cause, and no longer be wielded by a traitor. Kayn, one of the many Demon Hunters extremely loyal to Illidan, in my eyes would make for such a great wielder for these glaives, especially since Veritas himself wasn't too different from Kayn, even mourning for him. Long-forgotten weapons and blades that were wielded by a now-forgotten people, the Aldrachi, whom were offered a place in Sargeras' Burning Legion, that only refused but remained uncorrupted. They fought hard against the demons but lost their greatest champion's blades, and they were personally plucked by Sargeras and offered to another demon hunter to wield them for his sake. To contrast Kayn, Altreus the Sufferer, who has a shaky history with the other Illidari and Illidan, would be an ideal wielder for such a complicated pair of weapons, both of which are considered the leaders of the Illidari in Illidan's stead. So I think Kayn and also Altreus would be perfect picks. Crafted from the Fang of Goldrin, or Logosh, and the Staff of Elune, this powerful relic holds great strength and command over the Worgen, even playing a part in the Night Elves becoming the first ever Worgen to walk Azeroth's Earth. The relic has exchanged many hands, but has a long history of being with the Night Elves. Given the long history of holding weapon and having some experience with it as well, as having a long history of helping out the Gilnean Worgen people of Gilneas, I think Bellarissa Starbreeze would be a great pick to use the Scythe of Elune. The very fangs of the wild god Ashamane, who had fallen in service to fighting against the Burning Legion, the two sharp teeth still hold tremendous power from her hunt against the many demons and many enemies of the wilds. Thistly Crow, already a rather dagger-happy druid, and a stealthy one at that, would make sense to become the new wielder of Ashamane's fangs. Though she is a follower of Aviana, nothing is truly stopping her from serving both for the good of the wilds. The Titan Keeper Freya forged these mighty fist weapons for the bear god Ursoc to wield into battle. While Ursoc was claimed by the Legion, and later even by the Emerald Nightmare, the colossal-sized weapons would remain empowered and ready to be used again for the good of Azeroth. Hoda Steelclaw was one of the longest-standing druids and guardians within Val'sharah, and even seems to share a connection still with Ursol, Ursoc's brother. Hoda, being one of the secondary leaders of the Druid of the Claw, would make for a great pick, especially given her constant nature of being in her bear form. One of the branches that remained from the first world tree, it was gifted to the druids by Aviana's spirit, and for the longest time it was kept hidden from those who would use it for ill or try to destroy it, though its importance to keeping the Emerald Dream balanced and at bay with the Nightmare was one of the most noteworthy qualities that it carried. I believe, given its significance and importance to the druids and the Emerald Dream, that such a staff should be wielded by only the best, and that is Hamul Rune Totem, one of the second most powerful druids on Azeroth, and would be the most trusted person to hand this to. One of the first firearms on Azeroth, the mighty gun was a gift from Mimiron to the Titan Keeper of Thorim, who wielded the gun for a time before it was stolen from him by quite a few Vrykul, and later entangled with the essence of one of his own Thunder Wargs, Hadi, though Hadi was now bound to the Huntmaster instead. Despite somehow being small in size, perhaps being able to shrink or enlarge based on its wielder, the legendary firearm would be best to return to Thorim after all these years. A long heirloom to the Windrunner family, crafted from a tree in Eversong's very own forest, it was once wielded by Illyria Windrunner herself, before the weapon was ultimately lost to the hands of the Burning Legion, and then was used to face them again. In my eyes, it's only right that such a weapon so heavily tied to the Windrunner should go back to them, and the best candidate who has no claim to such a unique or rare weapon yet, but is a skilled archer herself, would be none other than Varisa Windrunner, the current leader of the Silver Covenant and the youngest sister of the Windrunner family. A strong and ancient spear, predating the first war against the Burning Legion, it was passed down generation by generation to the High Mountain tribe leaders and people. Crafted and blessed by many wild gods, it eventually went to the hands of Hole in High Mountain, who wielded it against the Burning Legion, passing it down to others within the tribe thereafter, until it was to be used by an outsider of the tribe to take on the demons that the spear had gorged itself on in years past. Mela High Mountain, being the current leader of all of High Mountain and its tribes, would be the most promising and best choice to take on her ancestor's weapon, and wield it for her people and the Horde. Originally, the weapon was wielded by Aegwynn, Mother Medivh, and a guardian of Tirisfal, though it predates her and has a powerful arcane entity that the guardian had trapped within it. It was safely kept away in the Blue Dragon's own Azure Vaults by the Kirin Tor and the Blue Dragonflight. With the current state of the Kirin Tor in disarray, I believe that Moldera, one of the acting members of the Council of Six, while seemingly disbanded, would make for a good wielder for this weapon, given her veteran status within the Kirin Tor. The very ancient heirloom weapon of the Sunstrider family was passed down from Anastarian Sunstrider to his son, Hel'thas Sunstrider. After being reforged when it had crossed blades with Frostmourne, it fell into the hands of yet another member of the Sunstrider family before being cut down. With no member of the Sunstriders left, to my knowledge, it would make sense, though, to keep the ancient blade, heavily tied to the Blood Elves, to go to Aethys Sunraver, whom aided in collecting this very blade in the first place, for the good of Azeroth. Proving himself time and time again to his people and mages everywhere, I think it only makes sense to have him be rewarded for such loyalty by carrying on the Sunstrider's blade. The very staff wielded by the first Guardian of Tirisfal, Aladai, whom had wielded this magically imbued ice staff till the day of his own passing, even wielding it when he had stepped down from his role as Guardian. Merrill Fellstorm, once known as Merrill Winterstorm, was one of the most ancient mages out there, and ever still loyal to the cause that he served in life, even being a founding member of the Guardians of Tirisfal. It would make sense to entrust such an ancient and sentimental staff to this undead mage, who even knew Aladai and had a great relationship with him as his mentor. A staff fashioned by Titan Keeper Freya, The staff itself was born from one of the branches of the very first trees to grow from the ancient and bountiful land of Pandaria. Eventually, such a staff went to the hands, or rather claws, of Sheilun, whom then gifted the staff to the Hosen leader, the Monkey King, whom placed many objects that he valued onto the staff. Given its status as a weapon meant to be wielded by brewmasters and its heavy connection to Pandaria, it makes sense to me to give such a weapon to the best brewmaster across 3 continents, Chen Stormstout, given the Monkey King probably doesn't have too long on Azeroth given his strange age. Alternatively, his niece Lily could also use such a staff if Chen chooses a quieter life. This very staff once embarked on the travels with the last Emperor of Xiaohao, whom was on a quest to save all of Pandaria from the threat of the Burning Legion. Instead of fighting, Xiaohao gave his people time and used the staff to enshroud the continent of Pandaria in the mists. His people took such a staff and locked it away at the Terrace of the Endless Springs to be used for another purpose. Asa Cloudsinger, leader of the Twaushi Order within the Alliance, given her patience and perseverance, an overall goal and even enlightenment to see lands healed rather than ravaged, would make sense to see Xiaohao's legacy and use such powers for the betterment of all. Forged by a Tol'vir smith, the arrogant Urmot tried to harness the powers of Alakir when disgruntled with his past work. Unamused by this attempt, Alakir cursed these weapons with a tremendous boon, with the wind, causing havoc in the wake of their use. The weapons themselves were buried by the Tol'vir people, given their sheer level of power. In contrast to Asa Cloudsinger, G. Firepaw, the leader of the Huaojin Order, would make sense to be able to harness the power of these fist weapons. His nature of being able to do what needs to be done for the betterment of all, and take risks to achieve victory, would make for quite the handy wielder of this potent artifact. Once wielded by the devoted Titan Keeper Tyr, the weapon smashed into the enemies of the Titans. It saw its final battle when Tyr was chased and confronted by one of Loken's monstrosities that he had unleashed on the Titan Keeper when he had discovered the other Titan Keeper's betrayal. The legendary hammer clashed against its opponent where Tyr ultimately sacrificed himself to see his allies to safety. The hammer itself was lost beneath the earth of Tirisfal for a time. With Tyr reborn into the current day and still finding a place for himself, it would make sense for his weapon to return to him once more. A great shield and sword passed down to a Vrykul champion, Arcadis and Irenaeus saw to it that such a weapon went to the hands of Tyr's Chosen so that it could vanquish any of Loken's dark followers that were following them. But ultimately, the blade and shield did not spare the Vrykul from death, and the weapons were placed to the Path of Kings within Stormheim afterwards. The weapons themselves should go to a Vrykul of tremendous power and potential, meaning the sword and shield should go to Finna Bjorndottir, until they can be passed down to one of the living who is worthy enough to wield these weapons. The legendary sword, crafted by Magni Bronzebeard from a crystal born of shadows, wielded by Alexandros Mograine for a time in battle against the Scourge before being claimed by the Undead Scourge and was corrupted, but was cleansed and wielded by Tyrion Fordring to later shatter Frostmourne and ultimately defeat the Lich King, Arthas. While Tyrion tragically fell, the blade remained to be claimed by another to take the fight against the Burning Crusade. Eretor the Redeemer, son of Turalyon and Illyria, would make for a great sense to be donned as the new Ashbringer. Being a paladin of immense potential and strength, he could continue the legacy of the paladins before him, particularly due to his unique upbringing as the son of a powerful light user and also a void user, which isn't too different from the origins of the blade that he could wield. Members of the Scarlet Crusade attempted to fashion themselves a secondary Ashbringer, but it was interrupted by a Dreadlord, botching the process and making the weapon uncontrollable to wield. After killing many who attempted to wield such a potent staff, it was sealed away by the Kirin Tor for the safety of the world. Given her current and strange upbringing of being both light and void, or rather, an undead raised through the light, and a student to Alonza's Fall himself, Kalia Menethil could make for a unique wielder of the staff, born from the very Scarlet Crusade who despises her, adding salt to the wounds that already exists between them by holding such a staff. When the Naaru descended down from the stars to aid in the Draenei's exodus from their planets, when it became grounds for the Burning Legion to launch their corrupt crusade, they gifted them a beacon that aided in their escape, mending their wounds and even bringing those back from the death. This very staff and crystal was that beacon, but over time it was claimed by the Burning Legion to stop in its great aid to others, but was later reclaimed. Given its overall connection to Draenei and those who worship the light, it makes sense to me that Ishana, the leader of the Aldor people, and the secondary leader of the Draenei, who is a firm believer in the light but also in second chances, it would make sense for her to be the beacon's new holder. The Blade of the Black Empire was a blade used to imprison the dark and yet mysterious entity of Xal'atath, whom the old gods for some reason wanted to trap within this blade, who throughout history would dupe and corrupt those who would dare wield her blade in service to her own machinations, ultimately only benefiting Xal'atath in the end. The blade was used to defeat the Legion, and even used, like so many other artifacts, to consume Gorbol's dark power. The blade disappeared and exchanged many hands since then, and it was even used to weaken Azoth, disappearing, and its place was unknown thereafter. We're not quite sure what happened to
Her dreams sing beneath the surface. Our dreams, our song.
Crafted by Sargeras himself from the fires of Mardoom's own destruction, and named after the very Dreadlord who was brave enough to defy him, Sargeras passed the powerful scythe to render and reap souls of those who would dare challenge him, though the scythe itself longed to cleave Sargeras itself. Ultimately, the scythe was lost over time and claimed by the Dark Riders. With the sheer terror and power that such a scythe could unleash, it makes sense to me that such a weapon should go to the former leader of the Black Harvest, Khandrahad Emiluk, who shares a little interest in fully claiming his old title, but could still very well take on tremendous power again, for the good of Azeroth, of course. Once the skull of the great Thalkiel, an Eredar who had tremendous gift of summoning and binding many magical things to his service, even the Void, which showed him many powerful entities that were unheard of at the time, his apprentice Archimons took a quick notice of his master's growing power and brought the leaders to stop him. For his transgressions, his skull was kept as a warning to all. Given its tremendous power over summoning many demons, the Black Harvest lead council member on demonology, Jubeka, would make sense to be the new wielder of this archaic and powerful skull. One of the most terrifying staves in all of existence, forged in service to the Dark Titan himself, the Scepter was capable of creating many rifts and many portals. Initially lost to the Tomb of Sargeras, it was eventually used by Ner'zhul to create his own portals and gateways to other worlds. In that act, calamity struck, causing the very world of Draenor to be torn apart and be forever known as the Shattered Planet of Outland. Unable to be destroyed, the staff was sealed away by the Kirin Tor, hopefully to never be used again. But it was. Given its long history and use of destruction by orcs, demons, and warlocks alike, Ritson Flamescowl, one of the current leaders of the Black Harvest Warlocks, it would make sense for this orc and his venerable status to lay claim over the staff. Either keep it away from other prying eyes, or use it for the betterment against those who would use it for evil. Crafted and used by King Thoradin, one of the first human kings to unite their people against their enemies, it was used in the war against the trolls and later in fending off a Cathraxi that slept beneath the lands of Tirisfal. It has rested and drank in the blood of the void creature it aided in subduing. With its long history and connection to the human people, Dana Trollbane, one of the last living members of the Strom bloodline, should rightfully wield the sword for the kingdom he now leads over in Strom'kar. Forged by Odin and gifted to his greatest of champions, the blades were then taken by the betrayed Halia, whom still had a great resentment for what Odin had forced her into becoming against her will. Funneling her own rage into Odin's blades, the swords were given to her own Kavaldir champion to be used against any who would serve Odin's will, carrying the power of both Odin and Halia in their wake. Sigrid, the current god queen of the tide-scorned Vrykul in Stormheim and daughter of Skovald, would make great sense to return these legendary Vrykul artifacts to her in her current regency over the land. And due to the complication of these blades, it makes sense for her to wield them both, mirroring her own troubled history currently. Crafted from one of Neltharion's own scales before he fell to madness as Deathwing, the sword and shield were wielded by the Vrykul king Magnar Icebreaker, who used the weapon to achieve many victories until falling to Halia's treachery, and the weapons were entombed with him in the Path of Kings within Stormheim. While the blade and shield were forged by Vrykul hands, the ancestry ties to Neltharion's own scale leaves the weapon open to many warriors who could ultimately use it. It is my belief, given the long history between the Blackrock Orc servitude to Neltharion, Deathwing's son, and the potential that comes with any Blackrock warrior wielding legendary weapons, Arioch, son of Eitrig, would make for a great new wielder of these two weapons, after he sorted out his own complications, of course. Tasked by Gul'dan to be forged for his best assassin, Garona, the half-orc and half-Draenei, who'd been bent to serve the Shadow Council's whims. She was forced to kill many with these blades, including the once king of Stormwind, Lane Rin, whom she had befriended. With her friend Meryl Fellstorm, Garona and him store the weapons away, so that the daggers would never be used again. Given the complicated history between Garona and her daggers, I don't believe it would be right to have her pick up these blades again. Instead, I believe that the current leader of the Shattered Hand, Thaga Graveblade, would make sense to pick up these daggers in service to her clan and the Horde. Talgath had these blades forged to commit heinous crimes on Azeroth and influence the mortals who'd come across them, bringing only curses and death in their wake, to bring untold destruction to the world of Azeroth and benefit only the demons who had these blades made. Found by Bloodsail Buccaneers and their Admiral Goreblade, she uses them to dominate the seas, only to fall in fortune and lose her hold on them to another. Late Admiral Tethys, whom originally aided the rogues of the Uncrowned in finding these cursed blades, would make for a great pick for these. And with Talgath long gone and mortals proven to overcome these cursed weapons, it makes sense for this pirate face of the Uncrowned to take hold of them for himself and his crew. Daggers that have exchanged many hands and taken many lives, these two fangs were of a great demonic hound and pet to Sargeras himself. While the beast was slain in its sleep, Sargeras' wrath was untold to the planet that costed his great hound. The remains of his beast were fashioned to a pair of weapons that would benefit the Legion, and was used by the Eredar Akari for a time until she met her own end to the Cloak and Shadows. Given their story and their complicated history of being mostly used for the Legion, Garona, while refusing to use the Kingslayers, could still benefit from using these fangs that once belonged to the favored pet of Sargeras, but now turned on any who would challenge her and her allies. Entrusted by Aman'Thul, the leader of the Pantheon, to his Keeper of Storms, Ra-Den, these powerful fist weapons were used by the Titan Keeper to unleash the storms to the Titan's enemies, and gave life to the Mogu. While lost to Ra-Den, Zhuen, the White Tiger, would later find these weapons and seal them away for the world's safety, recognizing their tremendous power. Given the nature of these weapons and their ability to bring life to the Mogu, I believe that the Rajani's own leader, Stormspeaker Quan, who has sworn to carry on Ra-Den's work after his demise, that he would do so and have the backing of these weapons to continue to keep the Mogu on the correct path and carry on his master's work. Crafted by Queen Azshara herself before her reign as the Naga's queen, the Great Scepter held the waters of the Well of Eternity within them, and had great restorative properties. The scepter itself was lost when the Well of Eternity erupted, and the Great Sundering took many of the lands and elves deep into its waters, but was later found and used again to heal those with its waves. Best to keep out of Azshara's hands, the most qualified person to hold such a relic for the betterment of Azeroth would be none other than Nabundo, whom has a long history of using the elements to better the world and has a history of keeping others safe and restored with them. Lastly, the legendary hammer wielded by the Doomhammer family line, the hammer itself had a long connection to Draenor's own elements, and was even born within it, and had several prophecies with it. One such prophecy was that the last of the Doomhammer line will use it to bring the first salvation and then doom to the Orc people. Then it will pass onto the hands of one who is not of the Blackrock clan. All will change and all will once again be used in the cause of justice. Such would occur as Warchief Ogrim would pass his hammer, armor, and title onto Thrall upon his death. And Thrall, now Warchief, would use the hammer for the good of the Horde until it was lost to the Maelstrom for a time, only to be picked up again by another, as Thrall himself was in a time of crisis with the elements and needed time to sort himself out from his depressed state. With Thrall's crisis seemingly over, or at the very least more in tune with the elements again, and in tune with himself, now would be the ideal time for him to wield his legendary hammer once again to take on the enemies of the Horde and of Azeroth, and to perhaps one day pass on such a weapon to one of his own children. Okay, and that was a whole lot of weapons to cover as to who should wield them now that the Legion has been dealt with, and their powers have been mostly drained. I'll admit some of these were harder than others, and I had to start winging it a little bit, but I'm pretty confident with most of my picks here. But what do you all think? Who do you think these artifact weapons should go to? And don't say yourself, or I'm gonna make you grind Azerite for 10 years. Of the two, I feel the most passionate and confident in Thrall and Eretor with those two weapons. But I want to hear your ideas too, so let me know down below. Thank you all for watching. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. If you'd like to hear from me and my community, feel free to join us on the Discord. Or, if you like me enough, please support me on my Patreon like these amazing folks here. You can also hit that join button too. All helps in keeping this channel alive and well. Until next time, my friends, see ya!